Thank you very much indeed, Michelle. Thanks, and so I'd like to thank FOP for inviting me to come to talk to you this morning. I'd say I know for a few people coffee's been a bit more sort of needed, so hopefully I will sort of just talk you through. So again, what I'm going to take you through is sort of the. Here we go. So let's just go through things. So the slides don't seem to be advanced. Oh, here we go. Okay, so what I'm going to do is take you through the landscape of where we are with clinical trials in the disease area of FOP. And as Michelle points out, I'm a PI on sort of all the 4 clinical trials that are being undertaken sort of in the UK at the moment. My background, for those of you that don't know me, I trained in adult rheumatology, but again, I've been a consultant in my current post for about the last 24 years. And during that time, I look after a lot of patients with various sort of bone diseases, osteoporosis, other rare bone conditions. But again, in our hospital, we probably now look after the bulk of all the people who are affected with FOP in the UK, both adults and children. So again, we've got a lot of clinical experience, and we've been very fortunate, as Michelle said, since 2016, with that sort of meeting, both with FOP, but also some of the drug companies at the time. We've been sort of involved in the sort of the clinical trial journey in a way, and I think a lot of you even here as well, this is a journey that we're on. We haven't reached the summit yet, but we're well on the way. And so what I'm going to try and do is just take you through some of the sort of where we are and why we need to be sort of moving in the directions we're going. And then again, when we have the Q&A, you'll have the chance to sort of pick the brains of both me, but also individuals from the pharmaceutical companies as well, because again, I know this is going to be really important areas to discuss. So those are my disclosures. Again, as I say, I am a PI on a number of the studies. I've received some support from the companies with regards to sort of honorary for sort of consultancy fees. And again, I'm a member of the ICC FOP, and I'm also on the registry board as well. But again, the views I'm going to discuss are very much my own views on the clinical trial arena, and they're not sort of anything to do with these other organisations. And again, just to give you an idea of what I'm just going to do, I'm going to set the scene a little bit, but we've already heard a bit about that already with regards from Ed and Bob. But again, I'm going to sort of just highlight again very much why we need clinical trials. I'm going to point out again some of the challenges, because this is very much, a lot of these trials, we are sort of learning as we go. And again, I really think it's important for you to sort of understand sort of, where we've got to and why we're going in that direction. A little bit about what we've learned. Again, we heard from Ed about the trials that have already, the 2 trials that have been published, and obviously very exciting that we have a drug that's now been approved by the FDA in the US and Canada. And then I'm going to go through again some of the current trials, and again, obviously that's going to be something that you'll probably really very interested and want to know about. Again, so FOP is not alone in sort of the fact that we struggle to have treatments. Okay, this is a statement from the NIH, but you can see that when we think of rare diseases in their entirety, and again there are probably about 7,000 rare diseases. You see, only a minority of them have a proven treatment. So again, and again we heard that sort of one of the themes is stronger together, which is what we're doing here. But again, I think also what we think about and what we encourage, in the UK is actually, both within the rare disease community as well, learning from other conditions and other diseases as well, because there's a lot of what's going on in the whole landscape of rare diseases that we as the FOP community can really learn. But again, we obviously need to improve this. So again, even once we understand about why you've got the condition, having a known sort of treatment is actually a really small number of cases where that's actually happened. We heard from Bob just in his session about obviously the management FOP, and up till now, most of what we do has been very much driven by trying to reduce the flare-ups, trying not to do any harm to the individual patients. And we've got these guidelines which are both in very big tomes, which can then be drilled down to emergency guidelines. But that, most of this is has been based on sort of expert opinion up to now, and sort of smaller studies looking at sort of case series, etc. We heard again about the do no harm guidelines and making sure that we want to make sure that we as the individual, the clinicians here, understand about how we can sort of look after you and what we should be doing. I think again one of the questions is doing how do you get that across to other people in the emergency room, etc. And again having that dialogue between you, your expert physician, and other physicians you're involved with is really important. But these are sort of the guidelines that we currently have now. The problem is, even with all that good care that we offer you and can do, we know that unfortunately this disease is so progressive that that over time a lot of individuals will get worse. And this sort of, we have this stepwise progression, and you obviously know very well yourselves with regards to when you have these flare-ups and you have this bone forming, it's irreversible. You can't get rid of it because, again, we don't recommend surgery. So despite all our best endeavours with our current management strategies, the disease has this relentless progression. The other challenge, again, and some of you that have participated in the natural history study, this is some data, again, from some of the studies that have been done, both from the natural history, but also from a patient-reported survey, and again, showing that, you've contributed to our understanding about the condition. But again, we know that, the disease activity is greater in children. And again, when you're thinking about the clinical trials, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, but obviously what we need to do is to find drugs and treatments that can be used in that early stage of the disease, that preventative approach for the younger individuals. So on the left, you've basically got something that showed from patient reports about what age their joints started to be involved. And again, I'm sure most of you can sort of relate to this, that obviously initially often it's around the neck and the shoulder areas when people are younger, and then sort of as you get older, more distant joints get involved. And again, looking at the sort of the incidence of flare-ups, you can again see on the right there that many more patients in their younger age are reporting flare-ups. So again, this disease is very much one of the early sort of years, and again, that makes some challenges when you're trying to do clinical trials. And again, we'll allude a little bit more about that. But again, even you heard from Ed Shaw again about the palovarotene story, and again, the epiphyseal closure in the younger patient population. But again, understanding the disease is going to help us sort of target our clinical trials more appropriately. Okay, so this is sort of a schema on sort of the clinical trial development program, and I think it's just useful initially. We'll drill down a bit more into what the purpose of this is, or where this is relevant for FOP. But I think what it's really the first thing to show is developing a drug for any condition, and this is sort of a schema for any sort of drug that's in development, takes a long time. Okay, you've obviously got a lot of research at the very beginning done by the basic scientists trying to identify compounds that can be used, that have the potential to be used in sort of a clinical trial setting. Then you obviously move into sort of testing. Once you've got a molecule that you think might work, you put those into animal models of your disease, and then you're looking to see what might work there. Then you have to obviously transfer this across to testing it in a human for the first time. Then you have to look at it in sort of patients with sort of the condition, trying to find the right dose, trying to make sure it's safe. And then you go on to a bigger trial where you start sort of, looking at the, whether the drug's going to have an impact. And then you've got the challenges of, dealing with the FDA and the regulatory authorities. And then you've got the reimbursement people that you need to deal with. And then you can start using the drug. So it's a very, very long process. Now, a couple of things, and we'll talk a little about it. So one of the things, though, is we know that process can be shortened if it really wants to be, because in COVID, the COVID vaccines got processed really quickly. So it can be, you can sort of, if you throw enough resources at stuff, you can make this timeline a little bit shorter. Okay, so that's one thing. And again, we'll talk about that. So that in some of the regulatory authorities, because when you've got a very rare disease without a proven treatment, the regulatory authorities will sort of allow things to be tracked a bit more quickly. The other thing, and you'll hear again in one of the trials I'm going to talk about, that sometimes you can sort of repurpose a drug. So actually, sometimes you'll find a drug that's already gone through some of that first phase with the pharmaceutical companies, and they've done a lot of the work, and maybe they were looking at the drug for another condition, And then they've decided, oh, this then maybe it didn't work for that condition, so it got shelved along the along that pathway. But then what they've discovered, someone's then thought, actually, this might work for FOP. And in a way, that's what happened with palovarotene, and it's what we're studying with saracatinib in the FOP trial. So again, sometimes some of that initial really hard labour is being done for another disease, and then we've transferred it across to FOP. And one theme we're going to think about, when you look at those things, you can look at the numbers of patients. And this cartoon is almost come from describing what you would do in other clinical trials with other diseases, heart disease, diabetes, etc. And they're talking of having thousands of patients. Now, that doesn't exist for FOP. We know we've got a small patient population. So actually, again, we've got to look at ways to try and do trials with much smaller patient populations. So again, this just gives you an idea of the scale of the problem. And what I'm going to try and do is show you how we can hopefully narrow that down and how we have narrowed it down. But again, to try and get you treatments that really are going to be effective and work. So again, what are the challenges? So the first one is obviously, yes, it's really challenging when you have a really rare disease. And again, I think what's really great is by having events like this, both in the US, but also all the other family meetings that happen in other countries, that's really good because we can both bring the community together. We can start talking about the trials. You can learn from the clinicians, from the pharmaceutical companies, learn from each other. And again, by talking about things, but actually trying to just identify who all the patients are who might benefit from a potential treatment. And again, some of the work that some of you may have heard of a campaign called Tin Soldiers, which is trying to look at identifying people with FOP in other continents where perhaps it's less aware. So trying to bring the disease awareness up so we can identify people who could then potentially benefit from a new treatment. Again, we've highlighted disease activity is greater in children. We know that. But of course, that's a real challenge when you're doing a clinical trial, because one of the things we really want to make sure is that any treatment we're going to give to a patient has to be safe, and then has to be effective. I mean, ideally, they need to be both, but safety is really of paramount importance. And what you'll find with most treatments initially is they will be evaluated in adults first, and then you move down to children, okay? And so obviously, unfortunately, sometimes, and again, one of the questions where people often say, when can my child be into a clinical trial? And what you'll see for a lot of the trials is that we start older. Once we're happy with safety and looking at efficacy, then the general consensus is to move down to the younger age group. But again, that takes time. And again, that's just one of the things. But ideally, yes, we want to find a treatment that is going to be useful and effective and safe in the younger patient population. The next is that obviously, and again, you'll know this from your experience of living with the condition, but the sporadic nature of flare-ups means that you may have a time when nothing happens for a while, and then bang, something happens, or you get one really bad flare-up. So it makes our understanding of what we're going to measure in the disease, but has been a bit more challenging. But as you'll see, we seem to be now settling on heterotopic ossification generally, rather than always the number of flares. But again, a disease which is so intermittent and episodic is quite difficult and can be quite challenging. And again, that's where the natural history study has helped us. Again, we talked about what endpoint to study. So radiologically is again, with palovarotene, that's what its approval with regards to the amount of bone. And I'll talk a bit more about that. But again, some of the studies are looking at whole body CT. Some of the studies have used PET, which looks at activity, but also function. We heard about the CAGES score. Professor Kaplan obviously gave a very detailed review of how that came to be. But yeah, you need some assessment of function. And that also can be challenging sometimes when your study is only 6 or 12 months duration, because maybe you need longer to show there's going to be a benefit. And again, function and the impact on what you can and can't do. Sometimes it's probably not so important for a clinical trial, but actually when you're trying to encourage the payers to reimburse you for the drug, they want to know what impact it's having on your quality of life, what you can and can't do. And actually, again, that's one of the challenges we have, is trying to capture that information both in the short term, but also in the longer term. So again, sort of having some ability to follow people up longer term is actually going to be really important. And again, I alluded to the fact that actually one of the benefits we have with FOP being with such an ultra-rare disease is that the regulatory authorities have made allowances for this, and that will actually have given the disease and the drugs being looked at it this what's called an orphan status, which means that therefore you can get more sort of, that they will potentially allow you to fast track more through the regulatory process, which is actually really helpful. Again, there was a paper published by the ICC FOP looking at some of the challenges, and this is both, again, I'd encourage people to look at this both if you're thinking of being in a trial. We also encourage the pharmaceutical companies to look at this because it highlights that we know that when you're doing a trial and evaluating a person with FOP, it's a lot more challenging than someone who hasn't got FOP. And there are a lot of factors that are sort of, it's just even the logistics of someone coming into the hospital setting, navigating the hospital, navigating the various departments, etc. So there's lots of individual things that are really important. But I think it's important that if you're a patient who's going to go into a trial, you can look at this and you can share this with the team that are looking after you in the trial, because again, it's just making sure that people want to try and make this whole process for you as smooth and as comfortable as it possibly can be, because again, your safety and comfort, etc., is of paramount importance. But again, this is not just like doing a trial in any other condition, because there are unique challenges for people with FOP. Again, one of the other things, and again, one of the dilemmas we're going to have as we go forward, and again, and I know this, I think, is one of the questions that will be interesting to ask, but firstly, again, is, whether your drug is going to be tested against placebo, which is basically when you're having a dummy treatment, so you're not actually having anything at all, so you're getting the potential new treatment versus a dummy. And then again, I know there have been some questions about can you take can you do a new drug against palovarotene? So at the moment, as Ed Shaw talked about, at the moment, you can't be in a trial if you're on palovarotene. But we do know that that with other diseases, often you do have polypharmacy. You might be on 2 or 3 tablets for your blood pressure, a couple of tablets for this and that. So maybe with time, we will start having to look, but trying to prove that your drug then is better than another drug is actually, you need many more patients in a trial to be able to do that, and there probably aren't going to be the number of patients in the FOP community to actually enable us to do that. So it's just something to be aware of, that at the moment you can't be on palovarotene if you want to be in another clinical trial. Again, we heard from Mona about bone health in patients with FOP. And again, the move now is we're not using DEXA. We heard why that's not going to work in sort of looking at the amount of bone individuals have. What we're studying predominantly now in all the clinical trials is this thing called whole body CT, which is actually quite a quick, relatively low dose radiation. Some of the studies have either got this PET CT, which is where you get injected with a sort of a radioactive substance that you can see that lights up on the far right. You can sort of see that black sort of thing around the individual's right knee. That's an active flare. So if you want to be looking at the disease activity, sometimes some of the studies are either in a sub-study or at least in the stop FOP, so they're doing the whole PET CT. But for most individuals, it's the CT whole body that's being done as the end point. And most people with FOP can have a CT. It's not the claustrophobic scan. It's just almost going through a donut rather than a tube. So with appropriate sort of help and care, most individuals can have a whole body CT. But that's something that we've learned over the last couple of years. That's probably the best outcome measure that we would want to use. And again, this is just some data from the natural history study, looking at the progression over time, basically showing that yes, over time the amount of new bone starts to increase. And again, this has been quite powerful data to help us understand the natural course of the condition, which then obviously you're going to hope when you start your treatment will show regression and reduced amount. So actually, again, a really sort of useful tool. And again, this is again just a slightly scientific sort of assessment shown here, but essentially this is the CAGES score that Professor Kaplan talked about. There was a question about that. And what you can see is that on that graph on the left, so the higher the score, so a score of 30 means that you've basically got a lot of your joints are locked down, you can't really move them very much. And you can see that that score obviously correlates very well with age. So obviously we would expect that obviously the older individuals with FOP will have more severe condition. And again, this sort of basic scoring system that Professor Kaplan and the team developed really does correlate very well with that. So the CAGES score is something that a lot of us will be using for our functional assessment. But again, over the longer time, that's the data we really need to really help us sort of hopefully with our with the health economics and getting the treatments proposed in that way. Okay, so we've heard about we know that there's been a lot of genetics and a lot of basic science has been undertaken looking at potential drug targets. And again, what's been really gratifying is since the publication and the knowledge about the genetics of FOP, there are then all these potential targets in that pathway that you can develop drugs for and look at sort of doing. And again, what we're going to discuss is the number of trials on this various pathway with the drugs, and then tell you where things are happening. But again, there are different potential strategies that you can use, either at the top end of that diagram, with the sort of with the receptor, and then going down through the signaling pathways, and then obviously you've got the sort of development of heterotropic ossification. So again, there are different potential molecular targets for treating this condition. And on the right, that's just a screenshot of the clinicaltrials.gov website, which again is a useful resource for looking at trials that may be happening and that have been sort of approved for individuals with FOP. So this is again this diagram is available on the IFOPA website. But it just shows you the trials that are currently in progress worldwide, and the various phases that they are. So again, phase 1 is sort of that first time you've given a drug to a human. Phase 2 is when you're looking at the safety and the relative dosing schedule. Phase 3 is when you're moving to a drug trial that's actually going to hopefully get you regulatory approval, and then sort of obviously you move over, and you can see that I think for an ultra rare disease, and again sort of friends and colleagues are almost amazed that for such a rare disease that we've got this number of drugs in the pipeline, and I think that is a testament both to you as a community, to the pharmaceutical companies, but also to all the clinical researchers in the disease area. But again, you can see that some drugs are in development. Some obviously have been paused or stopped, either for sort of perhaps for scientific reasons, perhaps for commercial reasons. But you can see that actually the landscape is looking really good, I would say, for potentially sort of developing a treatment that's going to be effective. Again, so this again is just again going back to sort of again, this is an IFOPA sort of chart, just again highlighting the various stages for the disease development. But I think what's really interesting here is the fact that what we're trying to do now is to say that actually, and we know this, the number of individuals that we are going to get into each part of the trial is going to be much smaller than that first thing, suggesting thousands of patients. That's just not going to exist. But you can see this gives an idea of the sort of the number of patients that are likely to be in each sort of study. So again, 10 to 50 in the phase 2, and maybe up to 100 people in the phase 3 trials. So that's the sort of the ballpark numbers that are being studied, and again, understanding that process is going to be really important. Okay, so what are the trials that are currently ongoing assessing? And I think the most important one is at the top of this. So the most important thing with this is safety of the molecules is key. Okay, and that is where both before any trial is approved, it goes through sort of an ethics approval at each individual's institution, and they will be looking at the safety of you in that study. And there will be lots of safety monitoring with regards to blood tests, other sorts of scans, imaging, that are all going to be relevant and important for your general health. Then we'll be looking at things like tolerability. There's no point having a wonderful drug if you hate taking it. And again, we know that there will be certain side effects that we might be predicting. Other side effects we may not be so sure about. But again, tolerability is really important. So most of the trials are assessing some degree of radiological outcome. And most that's the amount of heterotopic ossification, either volume, location, activity, new lesions. I say disease activity could be flare-ups. Some of you might be being asked to report daily diaries of how much pain you've got, whether you've got a new flare-up, etc. So again, understanding your disease in his real time is going to be key. And then function. And again, that just might be just what you can do. It might be whether you're needing to have certain aids and appliances. But again, that's probably always going to be a secondary outcome in a trial, but actually is going to be really important when we come to sort of trying to get the drugs reimbursed. Because again, that's really where the payers like things to happen. So again, but again, top of the list, always going to be safety. So these are the ongoing trials that are going out. And what I'm going to do is just basically very briefly review some of the sort of top line criteria for all of them. The first thing I'll say to people is, I'm not quite sure who thinks of all these names of the drugs, okay? Because but luckily, the trials have sort of almost like acronyms or other names, so that's going to be really useful. But the drugs always sound pretty complicated. I think again, what you can see here is a few things. So firstly, the trials will differ slightly in the age of the patients that they're recruiting. So that might influence your choice a little bit as to which trial you want to go into or can go into. You can see that the trials differ a little bit by whether they're tablets or one of them is an intravenous treatment. Okay, they differ a little bit for how long you're on being compared to placebo for. So all these trials start off as being placebo controlled. Then some of them move over to open, as into being on the treatment. Okay, but actually for all of them, both you and the study doctors are blinded, and that means that we won't know which drug whether you're on the drug or whether you're on the placebo. So so all through the study, you might be saying, "Oh, I know I'm on it," and we go, "Well, I don't know." We don't know at all. So, and that will happen. That goes on for all these things. So, again, that's just something to be aware of, and I think it's really important that again, there'll be some trials where just if you're the wrong age, if the study is only in adults, we're not going to yet be able to use it in a child. But obviously, you can see some of them. There are sort of different age cutoffs that people may or may not be able to do. Okay, so very quickly, so the Falcon trial, okay, is a study sponsored by Ipsen, and again, you can see in that study, the design initially is being looked at in sort of individuals over age 15, but then again with time it's possible then that the age range that they may start moving into the younger population. And again, this is sort of just again, it's one of those situations. It's sort of an adaptive trial, or it's not. I mean, in the way that you're assessing it first in the adults and then moving down to the younger population. It's approved. It's being studied in people who've got sort of an ACVR1 mutation, and again, the outcome measure it's a tablet formulation and placebo-controlled to start with, and then you move on to sort of being on the active treatment, but we wouldn't know whether you don't know for that first placebo control bit whether you've been on the drug or not. So again, sort of that's the main sort of criteria for that, and we can talk more in the question and answers about the relative sort of if you've got any specific questions about that one particular trial. The Regeneron trial, the Optima trial. This point of difference is that it's an intravenous treatment, so it's a monthly infusion that is given. It's only, though, at the moment in adults. You've got to be over the age of 18. The outcome measure it's looking at is whole body CT, and again, it's placebo control sort of trial component. Obviously, this study is a follow-on treatment to the Lumina study that, again, Ed presented, showing one of the studies that had been published earlier in the year. because again, so there is data already for this drug. What was that? And that study was only a 6-month placebo control arm of the study. And this is a sort of an extended part of the study, as an extended new study to evaluate more the safety of the treatment and the longer term use of the drug. So again, it's a treatment that's already had some preliminary data published, but needs further studies needs a further study to move it forward. But again, the entry criteria, etc., are shown there. The progress study, again, so this is an oral agent, so back to a tablet formulation. You can again see the age range. So in this study, it's aged sort of over the age of 12 or 12 and over. So again, that's is a point of difference with regards to some of the other studies. Again, and it's initially placebo controlled, and then sort of everyone will be reassaulted or moves on to the treatment. But again, the clinicians and all staff will still remain blinded, so they won't know for that first period of time whether you were on the treatment or not on the treatment. So again, a study that will be evaluating whole body CT as the outcome, and again is being undertaken at a number of sites, which we will discuss. And then the STOP FOP trial is a trial that at the moment is only running in Europe. This trial is different from the other three in the fact that it's not sponsored by a pharmaceutical company. As such, it's been funded by a grant from the EU, and is being run out of centres both in London, Germany, and the main site, Amsterdam. And I know Marilee Seekoff will be joining for the Q&A, who's the chief investigator for that trial. So this, again, is an oral drug. This drug, again, was a drug that was repurposed, so it was already being evaluated for another indication from AstraZeneca. It didn't achieve its sort of outcome in what it was hoping for, so it was sitting on a shelf in a library, sort of gathering some dust. And then basically Alex Bullock and the team from Oxford realised that this drug would be very, very specific to the ACVR mutation and sort of the potentially sort of helping with the treatment. So again, it's an adult-only study, so it's only in individuals over the age of 18. It's a 6-month placebo-controlled trial before switching over to everyone being on the treatment, although we will all still remain blinded. The outcome measure in this study is PET-CT, which rather than just CT alone. So it's PET-CT is the outcome measure. But again, this study is also active and recruiting at the moment, but is only really recruiting predominantly from Europe and from those main UK countries, main countries in the EU. Now, this is the challenge we have as a community, okay? So when you go through the clinical trials, the number of patients that each trial needs to recruit to actually deliver it to actually get a result that's going to be meaningful, this is the numbers, okay? So to achieve these results, we're going to need about just shy of 250 people with FOP to be in the research. So that's a real challenge, okay? And as I say, I think it's achievable, but it is going to be hard work to get these to get a trial that's going to then get a treatment that's then get approved. So again, it's just quite sobering though to look at the absolute numbers that are going to be needed to basically to get a result. But again, that's just something to be aware of. So that's great. There's lots of scientific trials. These drugs, to get to that position where they're doing a trial, they've got to have gone through the animal data. They've got to have done the phase, that initial testing in human beings for the first time. That's all good. That works. They're moving through the phase 2s, the phase 3. How are you going to decide what drug is right, what trial is right for you? Okay. And again, I think the most important thing here is that the most important thing for you is probably if you've got an FOP expert clinician that's looking after you, that is involved with these trials, talk to them. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit more myself, but that's key, because when you get sent your information about the drug, that you'll get sent a patient information leaflet that's supposed to be, nice, easily, friendly, read, etc. But it's about 25 pages, okay? And, it have quite a lot of information, which is quite intense and can be quite difficult to understand, even for me. I mean, because, there's a lot of information out there. They've got to tell you everything, the potential side effects, what's been done, this, that, whatever. And so it's quite complicated. So I would urge you, once you've made contact with sites, if they've sent you information and there's stuff you don't understand or you want to talk it through, you need to find one of the team that you can talk to. And again, I always tell my patients, if I'm looking after you, which is what I do as part of my National Health Service job, obviously I'd like you to be part of a trial if you want to be part of a trial, but if you decide you don't, we'll still look after you, because that's my job. But equally, if you've got a question about the trial or there's something you're not sure about, I will do my best to answer whatever questions you have, okay? And I'm sure your local doctors will do exactly the same things for you. So, it's not an easy decision to make, and each person's circumstances, preferences, etc., are all going to be very, very different. So it's individualized. It'll be an individualized decision. So it's going to be impossible to sort of give a generic, this one's, you should do this or that. But at an individual level, we will try our best to help you make that decision. One of the most important decisions, firstly, is which country is doing the trials, because, and this again, I went through the clinicaltrials.gov looking at all the sites, and when you look at these, sort of go through, this is the number of sites that are listed on the website, and you can see, there's an awful lot of countries that are available or doing the studies. Obviously, different countries might be doing different trials, and obviously that might affect whether you can, whether if you go to one country they'll do it. But often, it may be there's a country where you can go, which is it's your home country, or it might be that it's a nearby one, and you could perhaps be able to travel, because sometimes you are able sometimes to do cross-border participation in studies. But the first thing is to find out where the trials are happening, because that will then determine, and then even within the country, is it close to home or not? How much travel is there going to be involved? And again, I'm going to big shout out here again to the FOP team, because if you want some alert on what's happening, where these trials are, because that took me quite a lot of time to go through all those countries and go through all the clinical trials gov. Let someone else do the job for you. So again, sort of, if you want to sort of sign up to that, you'll get some alerts of basically, is a new country open, probably is a new site open, and that might help you make a really basic, simple decision. Okay. These are some words in a publication, I think, from Fred Kaplan. But I think it's really important, to be aware when we're in the space of clinical trials. Firstly, these drugs, we think scientifically they ought to work, because all the evidence from animal data, etc., says they should. But we're not sure. That's why we're doing the trial. Okay, and we might find that there are side effects we've known about. There might be side effects we don't know about. But again, you have to, we've got to weigh all that up. Is it right for you at this right particular time? But without the trials, we're not going to get an approved treatment. Now, we have one, but maybe we can do better. But unless we do trials, we're all going to be left with, we've got lots of non-licensed, non-approved drugs. And you're going to hear again from Mona tomorrow about that. But I think we should, ideally for you, be moving to a position where we do have approved drugs, which have got been approved, and have got both safety and efficacy data, rather than a bit of I think I've tried it. We want to move away from just a bit of, I've tried this in a few people, but I don't quite know whether it does or doesn't work. We have done it, and we can do it more with appropriate sort of support and all working together in that respect. Now, I put this up because I was trying to this was also my sort of decision tree of how you should sort of try and decide which trial is right for you or not. And I thought there's no point me listing it, but I just tried to put this up, and it's sort of, I'll walk you through it. So the top left is, the first thing might be, well, how many trips to hospital am I going to need to make? Because coming sometimes to a hospital, how far is the hospital, the research site, away from where I live? We've tried to make that easy. You only need to come to site for certain amounts of time. A lot of the trials will use home sort of nursing people to come to your home. Maybe if it's just to have a blood test, you can have that blood test taken in your home environment. The nurses will be hopefully trained in sort of, taking blood from people with FOP. But, trying to sort of, just work out that the commitment for you coming backwards and forwards from the hospital site. Sort of, at 12 o'clock, obviously, is the trial just for adults or is it for children? What's the age cut-off? That's going to be important. Is it tablets? Is it infusions? Some people, might not really don't want to have an infusion. Some people might be quite happy. It's less bad than taking a tablet. Say the travel. How far are you away? From the hospital. Are you going to need to fly to the site? Is that going to be a challenge or not? What's your relationship with the doctor? Are you at a site where you've got your FOP expert, or is it not the sort of, is your FOP care somewhere different to where the clinical trial's happening? What sort of safety assessments are being done? How often are you going to need to have a certain other scan, other sort of assessments, etc.? And how many blood tests, how many questionnaires? Again, we sometimes say to people, you can sometimes have so many questionnaires you have to fill in online, or pain diaries or flare diaries. How much demand are we putting on you? And sometimes, we have to take a step back from, put ourselves in your shoes and start thinking of what's the demand, etc. So again, there's lots of things that you need to think through, and again, you can get that sort of information, but again, talk it through with your caregiver as well as other people. So hopefully I've given you a bit of an overview of where we are. I'm sure there'll be some questions to the other members of the panel coming up, but again, I think what's really important is that we know trials are needed. We know that that the current sort of drugs we've got, outside of the sort of the proven treatments, reduce the flare-up symptoms, yes, but really don't prevent the progression of the disease. We have one approved trial in Canada, UAE, and US, but we've got the potential, I think, to get other drugs, onto the marketplace by sort of us all helping together to work things through. So basically, just again, these slides will be available. I just thought there's a couple of resources, again, that are useful for people if you want sort of information about participating in clinical trials. FOP has, again, it's very good sort of resource on its website. I've just linked something from the FDA about, what patients need to know about clinical research. There's something, again, I found from sort of health talk, and also Genetic Alliance. And again, that's sort of looking at other disease areas as well. But they're really useful resources for people because it gives you, again, some of the questions you might want to ask, or just some of the thinking about it. Because, again, some of these things, particularly the latter ones, sort of the last three, are not specific about FOP. They're sort of pulling on the, what people from other rare diseases might need to know as well. But again, really, really useful resources to be available. And again, you can look at those in your own time. And finally, just a couple of acknowledgements and thanks. So again, I really think, in the place we are, really, it's great, that we've got the support of pharmaceutical companies, really working really hard to find a cure for people with FOP. I think, again, I'd like to thank all the clinical, I'm giving the talk because I know I'm a PI for 4 studies, but equally there are lots of other clinical investigators, some who are here today, some are online, but the investigators who are all involved with trying to sort of, again, help develop a cure for FOP. I think, again, the members of the ICC, again, some who are here and some online, who've actually set the standards for both clinical care and sort of trial assessments. I think, a big shout out to Michelle and the FOP team for all the support they give to sort of, both you as a community, but also really helping sort of engage the enthusiasm for clinical research in the area. Again, I'm the spokesman for my team at in the UK, but again, I couldn't do this without the support and the help of all my clinical research team in London. And again, the big shout out, the final shout out, goes to, you, the people, the families, the people with FOP who have that lived experience, but also for the faith you have in us to actually develop a cure for you. So with that, I'm going to say thank you very much, and I'm sure we'll have a great question and answer session coming up. So thank you very much. Cool.
I told you he has lots of great information. It's an incredible opportunity, but it's a challenge, and so we're grateful to have all of our FOP experts really working with us on this. So now I'm going to invite some folks from the pharmaceutical companies that are working on these trials to come to the stage. So Sue Moran is here with Insight. We have Dr. Susan Rhee with Regeneron. And then we also have Dr. Nagar Karimian, who is going to come join us from Ipsen. And then live from Amsterdam is Dr. Marilies Eekhoff, who is going to be talking with us about the Stop FOP clinical trial. And we're going to get to see her in the beginning, but her internet connection is tough, so she might go away, but she's actually still there, and you can hear from her. So, okay. There she is. Welcome, Dr. Eekhoff.
Well, hello, Michelle. Hello, everyone. I'm in Amsterdam this evening here, but this morning in your beautiful city with all the people.
Okay, well, thank you. So we are going to start off with some of the questions that were submitted, and then we will also take questions from the audience. There are people with mics, so if you have a question, we'll just have you raise your hands. But earlier, I think Dr. Keene shared that right now, and I think Dr. Shao said it too, that if you are taking a prescription for Sohonos, that you cannot be in another clinical trial. And so the question that someone raised is, when will Sohonos become the standard of care and no longer be an exclusion for clinical trial participation? So I'm looking to you. You can't see me down there, but I'm looking at you first.
So I suppose standard of care, I mean, I think that, you know, as you're aware, obviously the drug was approved by the FDA, I think, in August. And my understanding, obviously, is that, you know, as Ed alluded to, there's obviously sort of several steps to go through with regards to getting it sort of, you know, being prescribed and reimbursed. So I suppose with regards to standard, when it becomes standard of care for the right person with FOP, will depend on certain other factors just with regards to getting reimbursement. Then I think you move into a more challenging world in the fact that obviously once you have the drug being used, you then perhaps have to go back to some of your preclinical data to check that the safety of the drug, you know, and then adding on another drug to it, you need to start looking at that with regards to efficacy and safety. And then, as I alluded to, then the next challenge would then be that just the sheer numbers, because when you already have a drug that is sort of, say, reducing bone by 50%, and then you've got to prove that your treatment is even better than that, you need many more people in that study. So that will be another challenge at that point.
Okay. Thank you. There was another question that came in online that there were trials at some point for squalene and thalidomide, and they were asking, did those trials end, or was that were they just referring to off-label use?
My understanding, and there may be other people in the room that know more, my understanding was that those were probably smaller off-label use with small sort of patient populations, I think, okay. But I might be wrong.
Okay. Any questions in the room? I want to make sure we don't miss you in the room. So we do have a question over here from Taylor.
I wonder if any of you have any thoughts or advice to parents of younger children with FOP in terms of how to assess the risk of enrolling their child in a clinical trial. It seems to me there's this kind of inherent sort of tricky risk in any sort of drug whose aim is to stop heterotopic ossification without also affecting normal bone growth. You know, and as we've seen, this isn't just a sort of academic exercise. So I wonder, you know, how does a parent sort of balance that concern, you know, with a desire to also, you know, sort of advance the clinical trial and, you know, hopefully ultimately come up with a treatment for FOP?
So I think. Well, I'll go first, and I'll see. I'm sure some of the companies might want to have a comment as well. I mean, I think you're right. I think it's a big dilemma. I think you need to, to again, look at any of the data that might be already available. So with the palovarotene story, people knew that the retinoids already potentially had that potential to do that, and therefore, that's something that was sort of. I mean, it was not that it wasn't unexpected, but it was obviously something that then did come to light. I think that what the studies are doing, and again, they are sort of gradually dropping. So it's almost as though, Lana, we're testing it first in the adults, and then some of the studies have got 15 and above, and then some have gone down to 12. So you're trying to get as much information as you can, but again, that sort of tricky age of if a trial could go down to 5 or 10, that's a difficult thing. It is very. I haven't got an answer. I think it's just a discussion we would need to have. I don't know, Marilise, have you got any? I'm going to pass the baton to you as the other clinician here.
Well, if I heard you well, the discussion is about especially the younger children or the participating adult.
I think the question was trying to assess safety. How would we advise about the safety in younger children?
Yeah, but I totally agree with your very good presentation that you need first to start in adults and to see whether it's safe in adults and then go to the children. And most of the trials are doing that. And if it is safe in adults and you also have data of preclinical data in a model in children, then you can go to children. Do you agree, Richard? Do you agree all? Do you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you.
I see you.
Did you want to make a comment?
Yes,
Yeah.
I would be happy to comment on that. So I'm actually on the same page with Dr. Keane and Dr. Eckhoff. First of all, it's going to go back to conversation with your healthcare provider to understand the trial and if that's going to be an appropriate trial for your child. But I can also comment about Ipsen trial, Falcon, and fidrisertib, that we are currently enrolling the the adolescents and adults over 15 years old of age. And after confirming the safety in that age range, then we're gonna go and open up the study to the lower age range of 5 and then above. So that is for Falcon and fidrisertib.
I mean, I'm from Regeneron, so we have an adult-only trial, which we want to generate data before we go into pediatric. But in general, for any pediatric development program, and this is across all, trials, all studies, just in general for pharma, growth and development is one of the key outcomes that we look at. So it's almost like a chicken and an egg, right? You want data in growth and development to give you the information on the risk for your child, but you also need to do the clinical trial to generate that data. So it also comes down to that discussion with your doctor, right? What is the data so far with this drug or with this compound or with this group? What are the possible risks that could happen if, it hasn't been yet studied in that population? And then it comes down to, again, that discussion with your doctor, the risk benefit, right? Do you feel like there could be enough of a potential benefit to take on the risk? What do you feel comfortable with? And do you feel comfortable with the data so far? So really it comes down to that discussion.
So I kind of want to follow up on that. So someone else asked another question online, like, how effective are the trials? And it's like, well, we don't know until we have published data. So the first plug I'm going to make is on the IFOPA table outside, there are copies of the publications that have been published about the current trial. So there's a publication about the MOVE trial, and there's a publication about the Regeneron Lumina 1 trial. But you're not going to see any other publications about any of the other trials that are up here yet, because you're still in that data gathering process. So maybe someone, I don't know who wants to do it, but someone could share a little bit about how you, as you progress through the trial, how you gather data, how it's analyzed, and then when you release the data, so people really understand, like, is this drug working? And sometimes we find that it's not.
So maybe I can start, for example, with Falcon trial. Falcon trial has a placebo control period for part A, which is the first 12 months. And then we're going to have a part B the next 12 months, and then we're going to have a part C, which is the extended part of the trial. So during part B and C, for 48 months, you're going to receive active treatment, which means fidrisertib. But during the placebo-controlled part, you're going to be randomized to placebo or active treatment. The thing is that until we unblind the treatment at the end of part A and we read out, we wouldn't have any idea about the efficacy. But about the safety, we continue to do monitoring, close monitoring of the safety through all the parts of the study. And we do have an idea about the safety because we have an independent data monitoring committee that would meet quarterly and ongoing basis, look at the unblinded safety data of all the participants in the study who are on treatment or who are in the placebo, and they will decide if the treatment is safe to continue the study. So that is the idea that we get. And about the efficacy, unfortunately, we would have no idea until the end of the study, at least end of part A, that we will read the primary efficacy endpoints.
And Dr. Reed, so once you do the efficacy, then how does it go from there to like who finds out first? I mean, I'm sure the company finds out first, but then where does it go? When does it go through publication? How, and that people would in the community would know what we're saying about the drug, what we're finding about the drug.
Yeah, generally, that's a great question, and every company does it maybe slightly different, but it is the same. I've worked actually in a couple different companies now. So everybody is blinded up until that time point where you had that primary efficacy time point, right? And that's really to preserve the results. You don't want to bias the results by, knowing what the treatment is. It's for the efficacy, but also for the safety as well, too. Everybody has an independent data monitoring committee as a backup, but also you want to wait until that primary endpoint when you unblind the data. Generally, there is, it's not just a one-day process. The data needs to be clean. There's usually a big day called the database lock where we lock the data, and then that gets sent to our statisticians who then do all of the sort of analysis, put together, and then comb through the data to make sure we're looking at our endpoints, our primary endpoints, our secondary endpoints, our exploratory endpoints. Then generally this is summarized. And oftentimes when you see that company announcement with the top line results, generally that's when the results are actually unveiled within the company itself. So when those top line results, those public announcements come out, generally it is something that the company has unveiled the results to themselves, usually within the last day or two. So there's actually not a lot of time between the time that we know the results and then that goes out into a public announcement. Now, when you get the full results of the trial are in the actual publication, and that can take some time because that's when you're putting together all of the data, you're writing the manuscript, you have to submit that to a journal. Every journal has their own timelines for review, so that can take some time to get the full results, but oftentimes you'll get the top line results very quickly in a public announcement.
That's super helpful, and I think it's important. This would be a great example of why you should sign up for the clinical trial alerts that we're offering because if these announcements come out. We do put them up on our website under news and events and then FOP news, but those are the kinds of things that we would send you in a special email. I think one of the other things I'll mention is that, when the publications come out with the results, they're often very long and they're complicated. And so one of the things that we've been working with the companies on is to develop plain language summaries of the results so that it is easier for me and all of you to understand really. I'm not a scientist either, so to make it easier for us to understand. So there are some plain language summaries of both the burden of illness study, which was not a drug trial, but the burden of illness study, and then also the MOVE trial, I believe, is out there as well. And there are other plain language summaries coming for other trials, but it's a really important resource that the pharmaceutical companies are putting the time and energy, and the PIs, I think they review them as well, into putting those together so we really understand what it is that we're learning from the trials. So, okay. Other questions in the room? Dr. Pignolo.
Thanks. I have a question and a comment, and they both have to do with burden of participation. And so I'll start with my comment. So I think members of the ICC have really advocated for simplifying protocols, making it easier for patients to participate. And to be honest, I think depending on the trial, that's not necessarily the case. And I'll just give one example of a way in which we could make the burden of participation easier. And that is, for some of the trials, there are criteria surrounding whether or not there's been any progression in the past 12 months, what the CAGES score is. Those things can be ascertained without bringing someone on site. And in my own experience at Mayo, we can exclude patients just on the basis of a short telephone conversation and/or video conference with them. And so I don't know to what extent each of the clinical trials is sort of advocating for that sort of thing. But my question is this, and maybe each trial represented could answer this question. What, in your particular protocol development, what have you done to reduce the burden of participation for a patient? Thanks.
I can start. Okay. So, unfortunately, we know clinical trials are very burdensome, as you point out. When we develop these protocols, we think about the patient burden as we're thinking about the assessments, as we're thinking about the visit schedules, trying to do things like incorporate home health. One of the things that kind of binds us is oftentimes what's required for protocols, so that requests that we get in, either from different regulatory agencies, they require specific testing. They might say, well, we want you to do this assessment, you have to do it, right, within your trial, or we don't agree with this one assessment you're doing, we want you to do it in a different way. And so then that generally ends up adding to the burden of the protocol, because we're trying to satisfy many different opinions, right? Not just internally to the company, but externally to the company. But it is something that I think just as an organization for ourselves, we actually just had a talk on this, on patient burden, trying to lessen this, the burden of clinical trials within Regeneron. But I know industry-wide, there's also a slow movement to try to see what can be done, especially are there things like digital assessments, with some of the new technology coming out, what can we do to make the clinical trials easier as well? There are challenges from a regulatory perspective, but I think the regulators are also moving in that direction as well, acknowledging the difficulty in doing these clinical trials. But happy to hear Sue or...
No, I totally agree with you. I mean, obviously we consult with the IFOPA, with all of the experts. We, develop a protocol that we think is as least burdensome as possible. And sometimes you learn as the trial goes on, those types of things, Dr. Pinolo, that maybe we could have done X, Y, and Z over the phone. But we truly do try to make it as easy as possible. But then when the protocol goes through regulatory review, you end up getting these other things that you have to kind of balance, what is the least burdensome, but also what provides the safety protections that, we need to do in these early clinical trials.
I think I also back up my colleagues here about development of all these protocols, that we try to consider the point of view of the patients, also the PIs who are, the principal investigators or healthcare providers who are in touch with the patients, as well as all the regulatory requirements that we have to meet, as well as all the requirements that we have to include in the protocol to be able to, at the end of the day, look at the data and interpret if the data shows efficacy and safety. Otherwise, the whole burden that the patients have been basically tolerating during the trial, then it would be useless if we are not at the point that we can analyze the data in a good way. And also to back up all of this, we try our best to facilitate, for example, the visits for the patients, reduce as much as we can the number of the visits. We can facilitate their travel to the clinical sites and have home health care, as you were also mentioning. So all of those sort of services that we can support the patients as they are going through the trial and they are taking the burden of participating in the trial in the journey of finding a treatment for FOP.
Sue, I know early on, when there was some patient advisory work that was done, you all were trying to use saliva for some tests instead of blood. Was that something that was able to come through in the trial?
Yes, we do. Instead of normally, this is our first study in individuals with FOP. So you have to understand how the drug is metabolized. We obviously have data in healthy volunteers and other patients with other conditions. So instead of doing serial PK work where a number of blood draws are required, we were able to implement, we still have to do some blood draws, but we were able to minimize the number of blood draws and substitute with saliva sampling.
And that came from your feedback. I mean, from you all saying at patient panels, like, the blood draws are one of the most difficult things, whether it's for an adult or a child. It's not just the fear of, is it going to be, am I going to have some issue from this, but just the fear of needles is very deeply embedded in the community. And so I think it's a great example of a pharmaceutical company taking the feedback of the patient community and making adjustments to the trial based on that. So one of the other questions, I think this is a great question, it came from someone internationally. They're asking, so how can I get information to my local doctor about the clinical trials that are available? So is there a special section on your websites, is it the medical information, or where would they go? Do they go to clinicaltrials.gov if they wanted to pass off information to their local doctors about the trials that are happening? Maybe they would be willing to be a trial site at some point, but how does that work?
Falcon, of course, has a website called The Splash, and we also have the link on IFOPA website as well, if you would like to check. And so the information is all there, and also in clinicaltrial.gov, the information is always summarized and up to date there. And there is also IPSEN channels that if you have a direct question, you can send an email to IPSEN information. And if for the exact email, I can, if you reach out to me after the talk, I can give you the exact email. And these are the channels that you can reach to us, or the investigators, of course. They're going to be your healthcare providers. And we have the list of the trial sites also available on clinicaltrial.gov and also on IFOPA website. That's another channel that you can find where we are active at.
Yeah, I actually do have to give a shout out to the IFOPA website, because clinicaltrials.gov is a great resource. That's sort of like the known resource for trials. It is run, US based, but it is information globally. And in Europe, they use UDRA, and some countries have their own specific one. But I mean, IFOPA has put in so much work into a really beautiful site that summarizes all the ongoing trials. Each of the trials, including our own, has a page. There are links to how to get in contact with the PI in case you are interested, and also information about all the trial sites that's updated on a regular basis. But every company, including my own, we always have a med info. So if your doctor is interested in participating in the trial, has interest, wants more information, definitely reach out to any of the company's med info, and that can be easily found on all company websites. We generally have a contact us or how to contact us to go into our med info where they can get information.
Okay, thank you. Did you want to say something? Yeah. So the med info is the thing that the physicians should be looking for. And they can sign up for our clinical trial alerts too. It's not just for patients. So, okay, so the last question is the loaded question. What happens if the trials don't recruit enough patients?
Okay, maybe I'll start. So that's a worry for every company, and as we do our trials, and especially in rare diseases, right? There's not a lot of patients out there, and with our eligibility criteria, with the ability or even the wish to participate in the clinical trial, you think about that pool of patients who are actually able and willing to participate gets very, very small, and as Professor Keene pointed out in his one slide, we're looking for a lot of patients across all of the trials. So what happens if a trial can't recruit? Sometimes that is actually the end of the development. If you cannot generate the data to show safety and efficacy, that can sometimes be the end of a program, unfortunately. What we try to do is a lot of places will try to salvage, right? So if you can't quite meet your enrollment target, do you see what you can do with the data? You still analyze the data. You see, is there enough there to tell us and inform us about safety and efficacy? And these numbers are not random numbers. We have a lot of statisticians and a lot of smart people who are working on the trial to generate, this is the number of patients you need to be able to show or demonstrate efficacy and safety. So that's why it's really important for us to try to get to that enrollment target. Sometimes you can't quite make it, but it's still okay because there is always a little bit of wiggle room. But if a trial cannot enroll anybody, then there's no data being generated. So that, unfortunately, is a possibility for some programs. But I don't know if any of my colleagues would like to comment additionally.
Oh, well, that's the reality, actually. So we all try our best, and we also count on the burden that you as patients would take to participate in this trial to help and find a treatment. But at the end of the day, if these trials cannot recruit enough participants, we cannot see if these drugs have efficacy and safety, so that and they could be potential treatments or not. So that's the reality in ultra-rare disease.
So really, this is a huge partnership, right? Any clinical trial is a huge partnership between the patient community and the people running the trials, whether that's an academic center or whether it's a pharmaceutical company, because we rely on you, and you're so important. We understand also that these trials are hard to participate in. It's a lot of time, it's a lot of effort, it's sacrifice, on behalf of the patients and the families, and we really do appreciate all of that you put into our trials.
So I think that's a great way to end this session. I think the most important thing to say is, if you have an inkling of interest, have a conversation with your physician. That's the most important thing. Have a conversation and see if it is a possibility for you, and use the resources that we and the other FOP national organizations have developed. That's why we've done it. We want to get the answers, and we know you want the answers too. So we're glad to work with you all and to serve you, and to also work with the companies that are investing incredible resources in developing these drugs. So thank you, Dr. Eckhoff, thank you, Dr. Keene, and our other panelists this morning as we finish up. I just want to give you a few reminders. So whether you're in the virtual